I remember the first time I stayed late at the office and felt a strange sense of pride. It wasn't a huge project or a career-defining moment. It was just a Tuesday, and I had an extra report to finish before the morning meeting. I looked around the empty office, the hum of fluorescent lights replacing the chatter of my absent colleagues. There was a quiet satisfaction in being the only one still at my desk, in the way the ticking clock seemed to echo my commitment. At that moment, I told myself that this was the kind of person who succeeded, the one who went the extra mile, the one who sacrificed free time, the one who worked harder than anyone else. At first, the extra hours were manageable. A late night here and there felt like a badge of honor, a secret ritual that separated the dedicated from the indifferent. I imagined this dedication translating into recognition, praise, maybe even a promotion. I pictured my manager noticing the subtle signs, the neatly organized reports, the extra effort, the constant presence in Slack channels long after the office emptied. I even convinced myself that the tired eyes and sore back were part of the price of ambition, a rite of passage into real professional adulthood. Then the work started to pile up. It wasn't just an extra report on Tuesdays anymore. It became a habit, almost unnoticed at first. Mondays turned into 8-hour days that stretched into 10, then 12. Meetings bled into after-hours email chains. Slack notifications became omnipresent. I started skipping lunch, telling myself I would eat at my desk. Weekends became optional. I thought I was in control, but slowly I realized that the office wasn't just a place to work. It was a trap disguised as a professional opportunity. I began to notice the way the building seemed to swallow me whole after 6 p.m., how the hum of computers and flicker of fluorescent lights created a world apart from the life I thought I had outside. I was physically there, but mentally, my existence had migrated to the endless to-do lists that followed me home. The first time it really hit me was a Thursday evening. I had been at my desk for nearly 14 hours, my fingers cramped from typing, my eyes burning from the glare of the monitor. My phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. "Hey, can you review the slides for tomorrow?" I stared at the message, my body screaming for rest, and realized that the line between work and personal life had completely disappeared. I didn't even consider ignoring it. I opened the file, knowing that if I didn't respond immediately, someone would notice, and I'd feel the guilt of failing to deliver. Overtime became a ritual that consumed more than just time. It began to creep into my mind, a constant hum of anxiety and responsibility. Even when I left the office, I thought about emails I hadn't sent, reports I hadn't reviewed, tasks I hadn't delegated. Sleep became less about rest and more about preparing for the next day's obligations. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing a presentation I had already given 3 times, worried about whether I had said the right things. My personal life, my friendships, even my own sense of self started to shrink under the weight of constant work. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself that this was temporary, that everyone goes through phases of intense work, that I would eventually be recognized, rewarded, or at least survive intact. But overtime has a way of stretching perception. Days blend into nights, weeks into months, and suddenly the temporary crunch is permanent. Friends stopped calling because I was always busy. I missed family dinners, birthdays, and small moments that I later realized were more important than the spreadsheet I had been tweaking for hours. The office itself starts to change when you become a permanent late-night inhabitant. The hum of computers in the empty space becomes oppressive. The fluorescent lights feel harsh instead of bright. Every sound, the clack of a keyboard, the beep of a printer, magnifies the feeling that you are trapped, that your life has been reduced to tasks and deadlines. I remember one particularly long night, sitting in a darkened office with only the cleaning crew and me, realizing that I had started to associate silence not with peace, but with obligation. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was accusatory. The cumulative toll on my body and mind was subtle at first, then relentless. I developed a constant stiffness in my neck and shoulders, headaches that refused to abate, and a tightness in my chest I initially attributed to stress, though it was really exhaustion. Coffee became a requirement, then a ritual, then a crutch. I joked about my 3rd cup of the day, as if humor could stave off the creeping sense of burnout. Even small tasks felt monumental. A simple spreadsheet update felt like scaling a mountain. Responding to a routine email felt like running a marathon. The work never ended, and I was never finished. Then there were the personal casualties. Relationships frayed because I had nothing to give. I canceled dinners, postponed plans, skipped friends' birthdays, and even began missing family events. When I did show up for social gatherings, I was physically present but mentally elsewhere, distracted by the tasks I had left unfinished. Conversations became difficult because my mind was preoccupied with work, and laughter felt forced. I had convinced myself that my sacrifice was noble, that my devotion would be rewarded. But in reality, life outside the office moved on without me, leaving me behind in a cubicle illuminated by fluorescent lights and the ghostly glow of a monitor. The pivotal moment came during a project that should have been routine. A product rollout required collaboration across 3 departments, each with its own conflicting priorities and timelines. I spent the week coordinating meetings, drafting updates, troubleshooting miscommunications, and filling in gaps where others had fallen short. On Thursday night, I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast, hadn't left my desk except for bathroom breaks, and my eyes were so dry I could barely read the screen. I went to grab a coffee and accidentally knocked over a mug of water onto my keyboard. For a split second, I considered giving up entirely and walking out into the night, never to return. Instead, I mopped up the mess, cursed softly, and returned to typing. That night, I realized the cruel truth. Overtime isn't heroic. It's a trap that makes you think sacrifice equals achievement, when really it just makes you tired, anxious, and invisible. As weeks turned into months, the monotony of overtime became its own kind of horror. I could no longer remember what it was like to wake up without dread. Weekends blurred into weekdays, and weekdays bled into weekends. I found myself developing coping mechanisms, checking emails at 11 p.m. under the guise of staying on top, scheduling tasks in my mind while brushing my teeth and rationalizing every missed moment of rest. The emotional toll was compounded by the constant subtle judgment of others. Colleagues who left on time looked like slackers. Supervisors expected availability beyond normal hours. Even clients assumed immediate responses were standard. I started keeping a mental tally of the ridiculous moments. The 8th meeting in one day that could have been an email, the 4th Slack thread that duplicated the same discussion, the 5th reminder from a manager about a task I had already completed. I imagined award ceremonies for longest consecutive email reply or most hours logged without human interaction. But humor only goes so far when your body is exhausted, your social life is non-existent, and your brain is perpetually in work mode. I began to notice physical manifestations of my overtime life. Insomnia, headaches, persistent fatigue, and even a dull ache in my chest when deadlines loomed. My mind became foggy, making small errors more frequent. I misread emails, overlooked minor details, and sometimes sent messages to the wrong recipients. Each mistake amplified the anxiety, creating a feedback loop where overtime caused fatigue. Fatigue caused errors, and errors justified more overtime. The breaking point came during a holiday week. The office was supposed to be quiet, most people taking time off, but the pressure to finish a major project remained. I stayed late night after night, trying to finalize a report that no one would read in time to appreciate. I remember sitting at my desk on a Friday evening, staring at a blinking cursor, my stomach growling, my back screaming in protest. I realized I had no recollection of the last time I had taken a full weekend off, no memory of a walk outside, a meal enjoyed without guilt, or a night of uninterrupted sleep. In that moment, the pride I had once felt in staying late had turned into a hollow, oppressive weight. After that, I started to reflect. I began to see the patterns, the subtle ways the culture of overtime eroded everything I valued: health, relationships, creativity, and peace of mind. I realized that the reward I had been chasing, promotion, recognition, personal fulfillment, was often illusory. The company valued availability over insight, hours over strategy, and compliance over innovation. I understood painfully that the very thing I had once considered noble, staying late, giving every ounce of energy to work, had become a form of self-exploitation, one that masqueraded as dedication. Yet, there was growth. I began setting boundaries, tiny at first, turning off Slack notifications after 8 p.m., leaving the office at a reasonable hour, refusing last-minute tasks that weren't urgent. I started reclaiming weekends, even if only in small increments. I realized that real productivity wasn't measured by hours spent, but by focus, effectiveness, and sustainable energy. Slowly, I began to feel human again. I reconnected with friends, ate meals without guilt, and remembered the joy of sleeping through the night. I recognized that working overtime for the sake of working overtime was a trap, and that real dedication didn't have to consume your entire life. Looking back, working overtime sucks in ways that aren't always obvious. It erodes body, mind, and soul. It blurs the line between work and life, isolates you socially, and creates a false sense of accomplishment. It makes you complicit in your own exhaustion. But surviving it, recognizing the patterns, and reclaiming control is transformative. It teaches resilience, time management, boundary setting, and self-awareness. Most importantly, it teaches that your value is not measured by how many hours you log, but by the life you live and the balance you maintain. In the end, I learned to work smarter, not longer. I learned to say no when necessary, to prioritize rest, and to recognize the difference between urgency and importance. I still put in extra effort when needed, but I no longer confuse sacrifice for validation. I walk away with the knowledge that overtime is a double-edged sword. It can teach discipline and perseverance, but without balance, it can consume everything you are. And that lesson, hard-earned and often painful, is worth more than any spreadsheet, any report, or any late-night email ever could be.